Active suspension was banned from Formula 1 28 years ago. But since the new 2022 Formula 1 cars ran for the first time, there have been suggestions it should return. This is because of the problem of cars porpoising, which was the technical talking point of the first pre-season test in Barcelona. Mercedes driver George Russell suggested active suspension as a means to solve the bouncing of the cars, which was illustrated particularly dramatically by the slow-motion footage F1 released of Charles Leclerc's Ferrari yumping, to use a rallying term, down the main straight. So would active suspension be a good fix for the problem? Why was it banned in the first place? And what are the chances of F1 bringing it back? Ride height is integral to the problem of porpoising. This is a well-known phenomenon that can be experienced by ground effect cars whereby at high speed, the powerful low pressure area created underneath the car sucks it to the ground. At some point, the underbody aero stalls because it is too low, with the compression combined with bumps either on the track or the impact of the floor on the ground also able to set off porpoising. At its worst, this can lead to repeated oscillations. While in some cases drivers can live with this, if the oscillation is still there as the drivers reach the braking zone, it can compromise performance. It can also cause damage, as a number of teams have discovered this year, with Alfa Romeo understood to have suffered gearbox problems as a result. One of the big talking points of the Barcelona test was how teams prevented this. Some opted to raise the ride height, increasing the ground clearance of the car. Others cut holes in the floor to effectively vent some of the low pressure to reduce how hard the underfloor was working. For some, it was a combination of the two. The trouble with both of these solutions is that they cost performance because it means the car isn't working as intended in less high-speed conditions, and teams don't want to sacrifice performance. Active ride is therefore an elegant solution, as it would allow teams to jack the ride height up and down to the optimal level, ensuring the porpoising effect is either not started or mild enough not to be a problem. As McLaren technical director James Key mentioned when asked about the possibility, it wouldn't eliminate the problem entirely, but it would make managing it much easier. So it's no surprise that active suspension has been suggested as an elegant solution. It appeals to engineers because it not only eliminates the problem, but also allows them to run the car to the optimum ride height. We'll get back to active suspension in a moment, but first, thanks for watching, and please do subscribe to the race if you haven't already done so. It really does help us to do what we do, and means you won't miss any of the F1 videos we've got in the pipeline. And if you're enjoying what you're watching, make sure you hit the like button, it's hugely appreciated. Active suspension first appeared in F1 way back in 1983, when Nigel Mansell's Lotus 92 ran at Rio and Long Beach with an experimental system designed by Peter Wright. But an active car didn't win a race until Ayrton Senna's victory in the 1987 Monaco Grand Prix. But active suspension really hit its stride in F1 with Williams in 1992 on the legendary FW14B. This system allowed each corner of the car to be controlled independently, electronically. This meant the car could be held in the perfect position aerodynamically and ensure the ride height was optimised. Programmable throughout the lap, it made the FW14B and its successor, the Williams FW15C, unbeatable over a season, winning 20 out of 32 races in 1992 and 1993. It required significant adaptation by the driver, and Nigel Mansell was a master of this. He dominated the 1992 season, but teammate Riccardo Patrese, who had been far more competitive in the passive version of the car the year before, struggled. The key was for the driver to ignore the feedback given by the car at corner entry in the knowledge that the active ride would ensure the grip was there. Active suspension was banned for 1994 as part of the so-called gizmo ban that also outlawed ABS and traction control, along with other new technologies that might have been about to gain a foothold, such as four-wheel steering. Since then, F1 has occasionally flirted with bringing back active suspension. Indeed, it was discussed and dismissed as a possible part of the 2022 regulations, while there were also talks about reintroducing it for 2018 as a means to level the playing field on trick suspension systems. It was also talked about in 2014 as part of a package aimed at reducing costs, on the grounds that such a system would be cheaper and easier than the mechanical and hydraulic means that were being developed aggressively at that time. The discussions for the return of active suspension took various forms, but one idea was to have a standardised and simplified system that would control costs by preventing teams developing their own technology, as well as limiting the impact of active ride. But the FIA and F1 were keen not to go back to active suspension, so it has remained resolutely outlawed. So given there's a good argument for bringing back active suspension, why shouldn't F1 reintroduce it? Well, there are several reasons why not, the first of which is that it isn't something that can be done instantaneously, and there would be significant cost implications. If teams have to develop their own active suspension systems, that's a major undertaking. What's more, it would also lead to other aspects of the car being modified to optimise performance. Given the cost cap, the baseline for which dropped to $140 million this year, that's impractical, and that cost cap drops by a further $5 million in 2023. Even if an identical system was supplied to all teams, which would ensure they all have equal kit and costs are contained, this would take time to produce. And just because technical directors would like this option, it doesn't mean it's logical to bring back active suspension, as McLaren's James Key argues. Secondly, although it has been described as a potential safety concern by George Russell, albeit referencing what he's seen from other teams rather than what Mercedes has experienced, there is an easy way around the problem in terms of car design and setup. So from a philosophical point of view, it's down to the team to ensure their cars run in a trim that works. The regulations do not insist the car runs in a way that sets off the porpoising, after all. F1 Managing Director of Motorsports Ross Brawn says that the solution to the porpoising problem likely lies with the teams being willing to dial back the setup to avoid it. Given porpoising is a well-known phenomenon in ground effect formulas, Brawn argued in an interview with F1 TV's Tech Talk programme that it will be down to the teams to deal with it. As we've already seen from the modifications that have been made, there are solutions out there. What's more, as Brawn points out, there are many other categories that use ground effect aerodynamics where active suspension is not permitted, and it is dealt with by conventional means. F1 and the FIA are also aware that an unintended consequence of active suspension being reintroduced is that it would potentially allow the car to be optimised around every corner of the lap, significantly reducing lap times. Brawn therefore suggested that if any changes needed to be made in terms of the regulations for safety reasons, these would simply be to modify the underfloor. So while you can make a case for including active ride in the F1 regulations, it's not necessary to solve the porpoising issue and potentially presents other difficulties. F1 has gone down the road of simplifying suspension, banning inerters and hydraulic systems this year, as well as making the geometry less complex, which means it has set out its stall to make it a mechanical challenge as far as possible. And the fact that some teams have been relatively untroubled by the porpoising problems, McLaren for example, shows it's not something that is a specific problem of the rules. As many have pointed out, with ground effect cars, the risk of porpoising is simply physics, and those laws don't change. So if you have ground effect cars, which F1 does, it's a problem that has to be dealt with, and if that means dialing back a bit on performance, so be it. F1 teams will get on top of the problem, and quickly. Indeed, how well they do so will be a key performance differentiator early in the season. And that, after all, is what F1 is all about. They don't need what is effectively a cheat code in active suspension.